Welcome to First Star Let's Chat, an athletic therapy podcast. I'm your host, James Gardiner, certified athletic therapist, certified strength and conditioning specialist, yoga instructor, human being. This platform, for the pros, by the pros, anybody in the performance space, and beyond. Welcome here to share in the stories of professionals, experiences, journeys, learning along the way. It's a platform to connect, to network, and to be a part of a community that cares, with conversations that matter, experiences that resonate, and generate ideas, thought-provoking, organic dialogue, passionate pros. Brought to you as always by First Star Therapy, Mobility Tape, Epic, and Benchmark Athletics, in association with the Canadian Athletic Therapists Association. It's First Star Let's Chat, an athletic therapy podcast. Thanks for being here. Thank you for being a part of it. We are officially live here. It is session 95 of First Star Let's Chat, an athletic therapy podcast. As always, brought to you by First Star Therapy, Mobility Tape, Epic, Benchmark Athletics, and in association with the Canadian Athletic Therapists Association. We're moving to the last week of October. This is session 95, edging ever so close to session 100. World Series starting this week. The NHL is back in action. The NBA is in action. CFL, all of these things going on. Women's Worlds playing their rivalry tour in the hockey space. Women's national soccer team playing some friendlies and international matches. A lot going on in the sporting world. A lot going on in our world as performance personnel. So this evening, going to take a little bit of a different spin on the podcast. Going to be a bit of a monologue. Going to be a bit of a standard James ramble, but we'll go from here and see where it takes us. So we're talking domains of practice, we're talking spectrum of care, and as a dual practitioner, as a multi-credentialed practitioner, there are a lot of blurred lines here. So as things go along, I'll try to disseminate. This was sort of spurred on by a couple people talking to me in my corner saying, hey, why don't you talk a little bit more about what you do and how you do things, and share it with the world and see if you can't stir up some more conversation and generate a little bit more interest in what you do, because there's been a ton of great talks to this point. And I think just continuing to navigate that space, navigating what it is we do, how we do it, and noting that everybody who's been on here does it their own way within sort of these domains and this spectrum of care. So let me start once again by introducing myself. I am James Gardiner, certified athletic therapist, certified strength and conditioning specialist with a master's of science in kinesiology and health science, and as a yoga instructor, and more importantly, as a human being, nearing about 15 years of practice working with athletes of all demographics, all ages, all levels, all stages, with clinical experience at the center of that, but a lot of field experience as well. And I think in looking back through those near 15 years, one piece that I've really picked up on and begin to hone in on is the collaborative space. And while we're working with multiple practitioners and different practitioners and practitioners with similar credentials or similar backgrounds or completely different credentials or differing backgrounds, the collaborative environment is one that we all navigate. So whether that's in the performance space with athletes, or it's in an office space, or it's in a school, collaboration is not easy. It looks really nice on paper. It sounds really nice to the ear when people talk about it, but it is really difficult to navigate and be successful in. And so I'm not saying I have all the answers. I'm just here to share my experiences and hopefully work towards answers. And again, happy to answer any and all questions through my experiences and through my biases. And please challenge as you feel fit. Reach out through our social media platforms, reach out through email, jump on here live and fire away, because I think these are conversations that need to happen. So coming back to my bio, I've spent time on sidelines, benches, dugouts, and training centers across North America, into the Caribbean as well, obviously for a couple of years in 2018 to 2020 kind of thing. I've been an educator in multiple institutions, including 2 athletic therapy programs, multiple universities and colleges, and had the opportunity to present both provincially and nationally. And every time I go and every time I get the opportunity to speak to somebody, I am reinvigorated by the passion within the strength field, within the athletic therapy field, with all the new things that keep coming out. And I want to touch on some of those as we go through this as well. But I also want to come back around to those central points of collaboration, communication, transparency in education, and understanding where we're coming from. So once again, I am your host, and I'll be playing sort of solo duties tonight. But if there is anything you want me to expand on, live audience here, please type it into the chat, and I will go off course as always to get to that. But that's where we're going this evening. Picked up this slide years ago, and those that are listening and not seeing, this is the athletic therapy spectrum of care slide. There are 5 domains, and starting in the upper left, there's reconditioning, then it drops down to rehabilitation, emergency and acute care down in the center, and then off to the right is assessment, and up top to the right is prevention. These are the 5 domains of athletic therapy, and I think there are elements of this for all of us that are multi-credentialed or credentialed in different things that overlap. And so this isn't turning into that proverbial pissing contest to say, look at all the things we do. But I think I really want to spend some time highlighting why it's important to understand that we can, and how and why we do all of this under the athletic therapy umbrella, with this being, or starting out as, an athletic therapy podcast to start. So where did this come from, and why are we having this conversation? I think, I guess it's not really a conversation if I'm the only one speaking, but you get the idea. Why is this important to talk about? Over the past few weeks, I've had the opportunity to jump into a number of scenarios, clinically on the sidelines, respond to acute injury, respond to mental health and not crises, but interventions of mental health in the clinic space, working amongst colleagues who are suffering with dealing with various elements of stress, talking to students who are dealing with this prolonged delay until their upcoming exam. All of these things have brought to the forefront just how rich the environment is in the athletic therapy space to grow, to become educated, and to continue to do both of those things. I was thinking going into a first responder course a couple of weeks ago as well, where it was a recert, and I was like, oh man, I got to go do this recert. Like, what a pain. And that lasted for about 30 seconds. When I thought back to the past couple of years, and I've noted the number of times, where I've had to use my first responder skills. Most recently, obviously, we're all aware, and we touched on it on this program as well, the first week of the OUA football season. I was not on site, but obviously other therapists, athletic therapists, and personnel responded to a catastrophic event, the young man passing away following a football game. And not things that we intend on attending to, but things that we are prepared for to a certain degree. So I wanted to start with the first responder, the emergency and acute care. And as I walked into that course, it so happened that it was with an athletic therapist leading it, Nancy Spence, and 3 other athletic therapists in the room, sharing the space and recertifying our first responder. And what an opportunity to sort of share stories and share experiences through not only first response action and activity, but through our profession. It so happened that one of my mentors from when I was in school, I did a placement underneath her, and she was in the course, and I hadn't seen her since I had done the placement with her. And it really highlighted sort of the small world that is athletic therapy and personnel in the performance space, because even though we cross paths as students, eventually we will cross paths again, and now colleagues and friends and people that we'll turn to in times of need or times of sharing experience. And that's, again, really what this podcast is all about. And going into this first responder a little hesitant as always. Do I remember this? Am I going to be okay? Am I going to pass this test? What happens if I don't? All those little bits of anxiousness moving into it, but settling in quite quickly to understand the reality of needing this skill set and understanding this skill set and highlighting the fact that this isn't something I have to do or something that should be draining. This is something that should be invigorating and reinvigorating to be able to have a skill set to deal with oxygen and AEDs and open wounds and being a first responder in an emergency and acute situation, to have the wherewithal to make the decision on calling 911, to um, set up emergency action plans with other personnel, to be organized enough to know this is the worst case scenario. I'm going to be prepared for it. Anything less than that, gravy, we'll make the rest happen. But an interesting weekend. We played with oxygen, we played with scenarios, we did these things, but in doing so, we took the time to share, personal experiences with first response. It took me back to the Euro Cup, just watching when the Danish player collapsed on the field. And the one thing that jumped out in that scenario that I really wanted to take a little minute to talk on, and none of this is prescribed, sort of just running off script here, but the way that personnel, whether they were athletic therapists, physical therapists, chiropractor, whoever they were, irrelevant of their designation or credential, the one thing that jumped out to me is that they had the athletes on board. They had everybody in that immediate vicinity on board, that this was an emergent situation, an emergency situation, and we need you to take part in this to make this as seamless as possible. And if you don't know the scenario or you're not comfortable watching it, I'll just describe it briefly. I mean, he collapsed. It was obvious that it was a non-muscular or musculoskeletal or orthopedic injury to anybody watching. It didn't seem right. It didn't feel right. The crowd went a little eerie. It went quiet. The response time was immediate from those around him on the field. And then within the first minute, the players on his team had formed a barrier around him, a circle around the fallen athlete with their backs to him, obviously understanding that something serious was happening, but boarding off sort of media and the rest of the stadium from seeing that. Now, we don't always have that, and we don't always get that. We don't always have the athletes on board, but it brought to my attention watching that we do need that charge person. We do need to understand who is going to take charge of a scenario like that and direct who is going to do what, so that the communication is clear and the direction of care becomes clear. And this is the theme, I think, for each one of these domains as we get into it this evening. But emergency and acute care needs clarity. Regardless of if you're waiting for an ambulance, you have an ambulance on site, you have all the personnel in the world. When multiple people start trying to achieve or accomplish certain things, although the intent is best care, it gets messy. And that scenario really brought out how clean it can be in an emergency situation if everybody understands what their role is for that day. If everybody's on top of their game in anticipation, there was no hesitation to respond. There was no hesitation to make a call to get those athletes boarded up around in sort of a wall around the athlete in question or the situation in question, and then the response team obviously doing what they needed to do with the equipment that they needed to do as well, or utilize. Working through first responder courses, obviously the capability to use oxygen, AEDs, and understanding what those are and when to use them and when not to use them, and how to apply pads and things like that. Pretty easy when you're doing it in a situation that has very little stress other than passing a test. When it comes down to a life-threatening situation, a real situation, we assume that autopilot will kick in, but that also removes all of the human element to emergency care situations, panic, chaos and ensuing around us, personnel, other personnel, or fans, or whoever is in the area, adding to that scenario. So again, just being understanding of who is in charge, who do I have, whether it's the assistant coach, the assistant captain, the assistant therapist, the other team's therapist. Like right away, these are conversations that I begin to have in any situation where there's field coverage. So those that are young, those that are older, those that are well practiced, correct me if I'm wrong, or reach out and tell me here's how we do it. I would love to have feedback on this. But I recently had a couple conversations with some professional organizations, and they said, walk us through a day. What would a day look like on a game day? And game day is no different than practice days other than it's game day. So there's a lot more chaos involved. So they are different. But ensuring that well before the game starts, an emergency action plan is in place. You understand where the ambulance is, where the entry points are, where the personnel are that are going to help, who's going to make the call, who's going to take charge, and who is going to be that barrier, that security around a scenario if there is something. Obviously thinking through single casualty, multiple casualty, and I don't mean that in any sort of light manner, but understanding that if and when there are more than one if there is more than one athlete involved, then that dictates a little bit different in terms of how we triage and do those things. So just coming back around to the emergency and acute care, it really highlighted for me the passion that goes into teaching this course. Nancy does an amazing job with that. And I'll just thank her publicly and those others that are leading these courses, because these are not just refreshers to get credit or recertified. These are enhancing our growth as a profession. And as we talked through the weekend, I think it was really, really critical as well that we talked on how do we highlight this for people? How do we go into high school spaces, junior school spaces, colleges, universities, and express that, yeah, you could pay somebody $20 an hour with a weekend course in first aid and everything could be fine. Absolutely, you could do that. You could pay less. You could ask for a volunteer. You could get a parent on the bench who knows how to tape for a paper cut or Band-Aid or whatever, and nothing happens and everything's a-okay. But what if something worse happens? And not as a threat or anything like that, but what if? Like, where is the protocol? Who is in charge of this? And how can we enhance the response? I would much rather, if it's my team or my kid or my whatever, pay and overpay to somebody who is qualified to respond to virtually any emergency situation and have nothing happen than underpay, have something happen, and then ask why. Why didn't we do something? Why didn't we do that differently? All of these pieces are incredibly important. All of these pieces are things that we don't pat ourselves on the back enough for. And this is a platform where I have had the opportunity to say thank you to all of the guests on here. And in doing so, I hope that is a thank you to you, the therapist, the student therapist, the physical therapist, the chiropractor, the first responder, the paramedic, the parent who's gone above and beyond sort of basic first aid and knows that there are other things we can do to train ourselves. Because these things are important. And again, bring it back around full circle to that early piece of collaboration and collaborative environments. If we don't understand who or what we have access to when we enter a new environment, we're missing a large part of the equation. Just as if somebody were to walk in the room, we don't understand who they are. We just treat them like a shoulder, which we've touched on any number of times if the case brings, an injured shoulder. And so a little bit of a predetermination or a little bit of a scaffold as to where things are going to go. So a little further on that, you're the host therapist or you're the visiting therapist and it's getting close to game time and you haven't had that conversation with the visiting therapist or you're unsure, go and have that conversation. Introduce yourself, ask for an emergency plan. Please do not wait until the time comes to try to solve that. And I think we do a good job of that, but do I think we could do a better job of that? Absolutely. We could all do a little bit better of, getting those hard conversations out of the way early. Who is in charge? Where does the ambulance come from? What would you like me to do? And there's been scenarios where, an opposing player has been down on the field and a therapist will stay back and not do anything because it's the other team. And I think those are the cases of, well, there's jurisdiction and there's the other parts, but then it comes down to like that good Samaritan piece. And as a therapist, if there's somebody down and there's obvious catastrophic implications on the field or, as was the case in week one of the OUA football season, off the field following the game, we have a duty to act and we have a duty of responsibility to trust in the fact that we are acting in best interest of one another, as well as the athlete who is in question on the field. So emergency action plans, emergency planning, and I don't know, for me, again, like it was just rejuvenating. It was awesome to get back and be nervous about handling oxygen. And do I turn left? Do I turn right? Righty tighty, lefty loosey. What are the flow rates for nasal cannula? What are the flow rates for BVM? What is a BVM, like bag valve mask? What is an AED? What are the new sort of ratios of compressions to breaths? Can we just do compression only? What does COVID bring? What are our duties when it comes down to this? And again, junior C, junior A, junior B hockey, amateur baseball to pro baseball, like we may not have all the resources. So I think this comes down to collaboration and planning as well, reaching out to people who are familiar with the sport, understanding that emergency action plans can be malleable, but they must be taken seriously and provided on a regular basis and run through, because I've also had conversations lately with professionals who have said, I haven't run through that in a really long time. I probably should. Thanks for having that conversation. I've been that person as well, where it's the last thing to practice because, we got to get all that equipment out and do those things. But doing those things regularly makes them regular. And that allows us to access autopilot when it comes to the physical expression of those skills, at least. And then if the physical response or the calling, the charge, the call, the control people, if that is in place and there is a scaffolding in place, then the physical expression of applying the oxygen, responding with the AED, doing the chest compressions, all of those things can become where the focus is, because those other pieces are essentially automated. So just a little bit of a walk through, I don't know, memory lane, but also recall, going back to first year and it being sort of 3 days, and what a long course this emergency first responder is, and why does it have to be so long, and so on and so forth. And now spending some time with it and really giving it the focus that it deserves. And yes, always hoping you don't need to use it, but again, not waiting for it to be too late. And so if there's opportunities in your environment, I would encourage you to go to high schools, to go to athletic facilities and ask them, do you guys need training? Do you have anybody in place? Do you have an emergency action plan? Do you know what an athletic therapist is, and that we have these skills and we would be more than happy to provide these skills? I think just having those conversations in small communities or larger communities, or small corners of larger communities, so on and so forth. So responding first and responding with direction really jumped out this weekend. Moving on to assessment, and this is the second part of the spectrum of care. I'm just going from the bottom and counterclockwise because everything's done clockwise for the most part in the day. So why not go backwards? Assessment. Athletic therapists are experts at evaluating the type and severity of injuries. This is MSK. This is also illness and things that we may not be essentially skilled in. So for example, somebody falls and hits their knee, and they don't get seen the night they hit their knee. But the next day they get seen and they're okay, yeah, they just fell. Okay, great, no problem. And then 12 hours after that, their knee is the size of a balloon. And the person who looked at that knee says, well, it wasn't like that 12 hours ago. I don't know, it was fine. And then you ask questions as a therapist in your mind. Well, was it just a fall? Have they fallen before? Have they had an operation in the past? Did they fall on their knee this way? Did they bend their knee? Did they twist their knee at all? Were they pushed? What part of their knee did they hit? And so on and so forth. And when it comes down to assessment runs as deep as getting the answers that you need to get in order to get to a resolution or a working diagnosis or the imaging necessary to figure out what tissue is involved. And so assessment is an obvious one in our realm, but I also think assessment can be done not just in the clinic. Assessment can be done while we're watching athletes move, while we're watching human beings move, because assessment for me is, although I just said getting to an answer, assessment is about gathering information. It's not about getting the answer right. It's about gaining as much information as possible so that you can help in the best manner possible. So again, this comes down to understanding who's in the room, understanding what they're coming in with, and asking the right questions, relevant questions to gain a history, study what has happened in their past, and study what's happened immediately to figure out just what could be going on. Because if they've just fallen on their knee and their knee is the size of a balloon, we may have a bit of a problem if they've just fallen and only hit their knee from their height of 5'3" and hit their knee and it's the size of a balloon. So right away in our heads, we're thinking, okay, well, maybe they fractured their patella, maybe their bursa's inflamed. Did you fall by accident? Were you pushed? Did you hit something? Oh yeah, my knee, like I twisted my knee and then I fell. Okay, ding, 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 ding. And then you have delayed onset swelling. So all of these pieces, if I had just stopped at you fell and hit your knee, okay, great. You have a bruised knee. But then I didn't dive any deeper. I miss information. But if you twisted, now we have to check some other things. So then we go down those elements of assessment that take us into orthopedics and orthopedic scanning and all of these other pieces. So when it comes to assessment, again, this can be a collaborative approach. This can be who do I refer to? Do I have a network of other therapists that I can bounce this off of if I'm not quite sure? It doesn't quite seem like it's just a contusion to the front of the knee. The swelling feels a certain way. I don't have much experience, so who does? And allowing somebody who's been around a lot of knees before. If you don't have access to that, then it's going to your basics and ruling out the things that you need to rule out. Always ruling out structural elements. Always ruling out any sort of referred pain, any sort of chronic illness or disease, inflammatory processes, these kinds of things that may or may not be relevant to the incident at hand. So assessment being one that we spend a ton of time on, generally speaking, and I had the opportunity a couple of weeks back to spend some time in a fourth year, I guess you can call it cumulative task at Sheridan College. And I thought it was so interesting to watch the day as it went on. As students entered the room to respond to scenarios, they became quicker and quicker, as we all do throughout the day, quicker and quicker to get the answer right as to what tissue it was or what the injury was. And we can infer as to why that was or whatever the case may be. But I sat back and we had great conversation about this as well during breaks and said, what if we gave students the answer? What if we said this is a fractured fibula that you're walking into? Would we shift the focus away from getting the answer right towards gaining as much information as possible? Because the information gained also leads to the rehabilitative component, the rehabilitation, the reconditioning, the elements of returning an athlete to sport. So if you walk into a scenario and you say, okay, they have a fractured fibula, I got it right, I'm all done, I'm going to splint them, I'm going to call an ambulance, and I'm going to get out of the room and get out of the way. It's awesome. You didn't lose a limb, you didn't lose a life, but what did you gain as a practitioner? In a non-life-threatening situation, you can gain so much from asking the right questions. How did you fall? Where did you get hit? What movement were you performing? All these kinds of things, medical history, all of those other pieces that you can get. Maybe not at the time of an on-field assessment, but certainly at a clinical assessment or a longer-term, longer-standing assessment. So we batted that around a little bit in terms of where's the value and where is the downfall if we were to give students or therapists the injury, because there are a lot of shortcuts and we all take them, shortcuts to find the answer, to get the tissue right so we can get started right away on treatment, on helping, on assisting, on getting somebody better. But again, if we don't have all of the information, we're missing part of the equation and therefore not getting the full solution or the best or the most optimal solution to the assessment. So a couple interesting things that just sort of came up through experience and working with students and also evaluating myself. Where am I cutting corners and why am I not asking good questions? And where are the times that I can spend more energy in understanding what led to this? Because out the other end, if this is an athlete who wants to talk, then you're going to get a lot more out of them when you allow that to happen and create a situation that does, as well as providing the outlets to educate athletes based on your findings in the assessment. Moving down to prevention, the third domain as we move counterclockwise in the spectrum of care of athletic therapy, prevention. Athletic therapists prevent or minimize the possibility of injury. I'm not a big prevention guy, but certainly injury deterrence. Some things can't be prevented, in my opinion, and my experience and my biases, but really great talk last week with Ryan Metzger of Clemson University and Tim Contos of Virginia Commonwealth University down in Virginia, and both of them as strength coaches and great people talk to this idea that, strength training is actually a lot of what we do is countering what athletes do on the field. And that may take some buy-in from coaches. That may take some understanding from coaches. That may take a lot of long arguments at the table or on the sidelines about why we're doing what we're doing when it comes to injury prevention or injury deterrence or strength training. I have always seen great value in strength coaches and the proactive approach to delivering programming on an individual basis within team sport. The opportunity over the last couple of years since coming back home to work with Dan Noble, who is also a guest on here, and he does a great job understanding who is in the room. And while everybody may be on the same quote unquote program, there are so many variations within that program based on how many skate sessions she has had this week. What is her next competition? When did he come back from his knee injury? When does training camp start? All of these things add into individualized programming. And I don't see that as much different than preventative medicine or preventative care in the athletic therapy realm. And so for me, as a dual credential practitioner, I see a lot of blurred lines here, and I like to play in the gray. I like to play in the gray because when I black and white it, this is when I'm a therapist, this is when I'm a strength coach, and that may get me into trouble for saying, but when I hybridize those, I'm a whole lot more relatable to athletes because it's no longer I'm the guy that you have to go see when you're hurt. So you put your head down, you walk into the training room or the therapy room, and here I am. I'm going to get therapy now because I'm hurt. And that's the only time I can get therapy. And so when I look at the word prevention, I look at it more of as proactive and really getting ahead of the game and building therapy into before people get hurt. So that there's no negativity associated with us as practitioners. I only get to see you when you're hurt, when I'm hurt. I only have to go see you when I'm hurt. And it's like you're off in this corner and you're segregated from the rest of the team or segregated from the rest of the group when you're hurt, when really it should be the other way around, working collaboratively with the space of strength and conditioning, physical therapy, coaches, logistics staff, whoever, to build this athlete into her space as much as possible while she's hurt. What else can we be working on while she's hurt to get her back better than she was before she got hurt? So that's also preventative, in my opinion, as well, or deterrent in nature. Taking the opportunity when an athlete is hurt to work on some of those other areas. Knee injury doesn't mean you can't work torso, hip, shoulder, elbow. Just read a really cool post this afternoon from Eric Cressy talking about the crossover effect of training. So he showed right hand or a left-handed pitcher working his right hand or his right arm in a Tommy John rehab. And cross transfer, cross education, the untrained limb's performance improves when the opposite limb is trained. So taking that into consideration, okay, you had surgery on your right knee. We did everything possible prior to surgery to get you ready, but now we're going to train the heck out of the opposite knee because there is cross transfer and there's some really great data on that stuff. And I would consider that preventive as well. And at the same time, pretty advanced level thinking when it comes down to rehab, which we're not in right now in terms of the domain. But again, there's a lot of blurred lines between these. And if we treat them as segregated components, they end up feeling like segregated components to athletes. And so when we allow these to blend, when we allow that first responder and acute care to blend with prevention, again, having a plan means preventing the catastrophe or disaster. And I think that there is a great blend here between all of this. And that's why it's a spectrum of care and there's little arrows and it goes around. And I think it's a great capture of what we do. The next one on the board is reconditioning. Athletic therapists work with individuals on a customized basis to condition. And we've touched on this a little bit, and I know there's some really great strength coaches out there that may be getting their backs up, and that's perfectly okay as well. Because, well, you're an athletic therapist, you got to stick to the clinic, or you got to stick to the sideline and just respond when somebody gets hurt. I would much rather be in the space where I can go down to the weight room or over to the weight room and have a discussion with the strength coach about what they're seeing, what they're doing, what their goals are with these athletes or said athlete. Because when there's dialogue, there is opportunity to fill in some gaps in our knowledge as practitioners, as well as provide insight and intel into who's hurt, who's hurting, and how can we combat this, or what is in place to help combat this from this side. And you can obviously see the blend here between reconditioning and prevention. I see that they hold hands on a regular basis and interlace their fingers, because reconditioning or providing customized work is, again, draws back to assessment. It draws back to prevention. It will also play a role in rehabilitation, because we can go to the textbook as often as possible and see that there are physiological timelines to tissue healing or recovery. But then you have to add in that other big factor called human, and human on the other side of the conversation or rehab or conditioning program. Because just because page 64 says it's going to take 2 to 4 weeks, athlete A is going to push the envelope and say, no, it said 2, I'm back at 2 no matter what. Athlete B is going to say, all right, 3, perfect, I'll aim for the middle. Athlete C is going to say 2 to 4. Excuse me. Okay, I'll take the 4. That means I don't have to play for a while. I can really hunker down with schoolwork or keep getting paid and not play and not have any risk of injury or whatever the case may be. And then others who work their tails off with us as practitioners, and 4 weeks blows by and we're still behind the 8 ball. So, excuse me, when it comes down to reconditioning and when it comes down to timelines, we definitely still have to take into consideration the human first approach, right? Those preventative pieces that we put in place early. If we had put in some deterrent and programming and scaffolded that in, would we be where we're at with reconditioning? I have talked endlessly to athletes over the past 3 weeks about getting ahead of the game. So you're hurt now. When this injury ends, we're not going to wipe the slate clean and say back to 100%, forget all that stuff we just did. Reconditioning now means that you are a different human being because you got hurt. So you must continue on with this component of the program. And here's why. So we have a rash of, throw whatever injury you want into the mix, a rash of hamstring injuries. And we get 3 out of 5 of the athletes back. They're playing, they're running, they're doing everything they need to do. And okay, no, I'm good. I don't need to do anything else. And the other 2 are still struggling to work their way through their protocols and their programming. And they see those other guys and back on the field. And regardless of if they're comparing themselves or not, they're always comparing themselves to somebody else. So those pieces, excuse me, I can't get rid of this tickle in my throat. Those pieces play a role in what we're doing, what we're saying, and how we're approaching it. So when those athletes are back in the field, those first 3, we also have to sprinkle in something different, something that is different than what led them to the injury in the first place. Because if they're not doing eccentrics, or they're not doing multiplanar hamstring strengthening, or they're only going sagittal plane and they're forgetting that there's a frontal transverse and all these other pieces that need to be trained, and they're saying, well, I squatted a whole bunch and my squat's back to where it needs to be, and so was my deadlift, and my hamstrings must be good. Then you add in the elements of plyometrics and push off and explosiveness and change of direction and surface type and footwear and all these other things that are going to contribute. But ultimately, most of us will fall back into patterns, and old patterns die very, very hard when it comes to injury. So building in those elements of rehabilitative programming or reconditioning programming and saying, listen, you were hurt, you are no longer that person before you got hurt. Therefore, we must keep this in your injury history. Not only in the computer that tracks that, but also in what you're doing. We must train differently from now until the end of time if we're going to attempt to recondition neurologically, recondition the tissue, recondition from a preventative or deterrent manner or model, and from an assessment standpoint. How are we evaluating and how are we going to continue to evaluate? These obviously play back and forth when it comes to reconditioning. The last one on the board is rehabilitation. Preparing individuals to reestablish their pre-injury lifestyle. I think I just countered what this says on the screen. Yes, we want them to reestablish their pre-injury lifestyle, but if we don't change the things that led them to injury, then I'm not sure we're doing the preventive piece. Then I'm not sure we're doing the deterrent piece. Then I'm not sure we're doing the reconditioning piece. Because if the goal is to get them back to exactly where they were before the injury happened, and we're talking something chronic or something mechanistic or mechanical in nature, then we're going to lead them right back to where that injury took place or where that injury came from. So working again within your department, within your resources, within your personnel to talk on, listen, we had 14 hamstring injuries this year. What was it? Was it coming off of COVID? Was there a lack of training coming into camp? Was there a lack of cleat wearing and turf, being on turf before we went on turf every day for the last however long? Like, where are those conversations happening, and how are those conversations happening? And are they welcomed? Because if they're not welcomed, it's pretty tough to make a change. But if there is a collaborative take on all of these pieces, we can begin to understand together we're working in the same direction. And when we're working in the same direction towards something, the ideas tend to flow. They may not be perfect, but we can start to consider, where are my gaps in my knowledge? Because if I'm saying it's all footwear, it's all footwear, it's all footwear, and somebody else is saying they didn't do enough sprinting, and somebody else is saying they didn't do anything outside the sagittal plane, and somebody else is saying whatever they're saying, now we have bits and pieces that we can pair together to make a more holistic approach to the rehab. Excuse me. Bad to have a cough in COVID times too, by the way, but can't get rid of this thing. Too much talking. So let me take a break here. If there's anybody who has anything, just shoot it into the chat. I'd be more than happy to expand on something. Otherwise, I'm going to wrap this thing up here pretty soon. But I think this is interesting. Preparing individuals to reestablish their pre-injury lifestyle to a certain degree, yes. But again, modifying that pre-injury lifestyle may be partly or may be the greatest injury prevention strategy there is, right? If you tore your ACL because your mechanics were poor, and we just do the surgery and go back to the exact same way, insert rehab for ACL tear here, and then come back to running the same way, cutting the same way, planting the same way, playing the same sport at the same volume, but we did it gradually, we've achieved all of the things that rehab has asked for. We have achieved all of the exit strategy to get you out of rehab and into return to play. But again, if we forget or we neglect the fact that she has had ACL surgery, we're neglecting a large part of her injury contribution potentially, or potential for injury in the future. So if you've had ACL surgery, does that mean you should be lifting differently than somebody who hasn't had ACL surgery? I'm not saying yes or no, but I'm leaning more towards yes. I'm not saying everybody who's had ACL surgery is going to tear their ACL again. I'm not saying anything to contact or non-contact, but what I am saying is I think we can think a little bit further beyond rehab of getting somebody back to that pre-injury lifestyle. Rehab is a component that we do. Rehab is a component that strength and conditioning specialists do. Rehab is a component that skills coaches should be a part of. And again, this brings it back around to sort of like that collaborative approach to where things are and where things need to go from a spectrum of care and from domains of care. And so going around the circle again, just some of my experiences and some of my thoughts in each one of these areas for the evening: emergency and acute care, assessment, prevention, reconditioning, and rehabilitation, all within the athletic therapy spectrum of care, all the domains of care that we cover on either part or in depth as we go through day to day, week to week, month to month, career, all the way through. But to do this alone and to not have other personnel to rely upon or to allow to come into these realms, excuse me, would be a disservice to athletes, in my opinion. So bringing as many people into whatever components where your gaps are will absolutely make you a better practitioner. It's absolutely made me a better practitioner. I will always rely on people who are experts. I will always try to find the room where I can learn something. I will always lean into the expert in the room when it comes to emergency and acute care, when it comes to rehab, when it comes to reconditioning, prevention, and assessment. And continual growth, in my opinion, in my experience, also takes into consideration the willingness to be open and to collaborate with those others as often as possible. Whether you disagree or not, having the conversations with those people will work in our favor towards providing the most holistic environment for an athlete or a series of athletes that we're working with. So just an opportunity for me to ramble a little bit this evening. I'm going to have guests back on for session 96 next week. Halloween next Sunday, so it'll probably be pushed to the Monday, but I'll make sure that everybody's aware on that one. Big one around here with Halloween. We just went out and saw a big 12-foot skeleton and studied the tibia and the length of the femur and decided whether or not they should squat with their knees over their toes or not. In the light of the latest Instagram debates. But anyway, so appreciate everybody's time and being here. This was a solo job tonight. The rest of the way, we're going back to guests. Won't announce our guests just yet because there are a couple just working through schedules over the next couple of weeks. But it is session 95 of Let's Chat, an athletic therapy podcast, as always brought to you by First Star Therapy, Mobility Tape, Epic, Benchmark Athletics, and in association with the Athletic Therapists Association. If there's anything you want to chat on, please reach out. Email is consult@firststartherapy.com, at firststar.therapy on Instagram, at letschat.at is specific to our podcast. And I look forward to dialoguing into the future, being challenged on my opinions, and learning from you. Thank you so much for being here. We will see you next week. Good night.
Thanks again for being here. Thanks for listening. Thanks for being a part of this community. Check us out online, firststartherapy.com. That's FIRSTAR therapy.com. Or email us with feedback, consult@firststartherapy.com. CONSULT@firststartherapy.com, on Instagram @firststar.therapy, and our podcast host @letschat.at. This is First Star Let's Chat, an athletic therapy podcast.